Hi, I'm José Garcia. I am a freelance writer, and I've worked on a number of projects in the tabletop role-playing game industry.
My name is Juhana Petterson, and I'm the lead developer for World of Darkness titles at Renegade.
I'm Andy Peregrine. I'm a freelance games writer. I've worked for most people over the last 20 years, I suppose. Mostly responsible at the moment for Dune and Maichol Pony for Renegade.
For Crimson Gutter, I wrote the First Steps story track, which introduces new coteries to the world of vampire by the means of tracking down a wight, someone who's lost their humanity and only exists to feed and kill. And I also wrote the Church of Cain story track, which introduces coteries to a dominant blood cult force in the city of this campaign, dedicated to the exaltation of the state of the vampire itself and the veneration of Cain, a commonly believed ancestor of all vampires, and upon which they build this alternative kind of ideal to a lot of commonly held religious values in the service of making sense of their new human existence.
I was responsible for the Camarilla and the Anarch sections, which was so much fun to do. Long-time fan of the game, because I had the first print edition of the first edition rulebook, which completely fell apart on me. It was the old one with the old original pictures. Picked that up, been in love with the game ever since, and I finally got to write on it for Law of the Bloodlines and Law of the Clans when V20 came out.
There was like one specific thing that was very motivational to me, which was a random comment on Twitter, which was somebody who said that she had been starting her first Vampire Chronicle and she had trouble coming up with like enough NPCs, like supporting characters. I had that kind of feeling that, yeah, when I start a Chronicle in Vampire and I suddenly have to come up with like a bunch of supporting characters, that's work. That's a lot of work, and that kind of sparked a lot of kind of very basic thoughts in my head, where I was thinking like, what are the things you need in the beginning when you want to run a Chronicle? You need characters, you need locations, and that was for me a big part of the motivation for the Crimson Gutter. And I thought a lot of it about it from a very kind of in a sense, like I thought about what I would need if I was doing this, and especially if I was doing this and I didn't have like days and days and days to put into preparatory work.
I got into Vampire the Masquerade through a lot of horror gaming. I was always interested in horror. I came into it in the reverse of what I think a lot of people came into it. A lot of people got into Vampire first and then through everything else. I got in through independent horror role-playing games first. Little Fears is one of my early introductions, the role-playing game Little Fears, where you play children in horror situations with a kind of a fantastical setting. That was my introduction to horror role-playing, and then through there I actually got in through the sister line to the World of Darkness, the Chronicles of Darkness line, and that's where I developed this love for these sorts of games, these sorts of dedicated games where you play monsters. And then from there, I started looking back towards the current series, the World of Darkness series, and it's from here that I got into, you know, your Vampire the Masquerades, your Werewolf the Apocalypses, and your Hunter the Reckonings, and so on and so forth.
Oh, I remember I was very quick to make up my own Tremere character called Ethan Crow, who I have never played and never will, because I'm a forever GM. So as soon as I brought this game back to my friends and said, let's play Vampire, this is great, they're like, this is brilliant, when are you running it? Well, well, looks like it's me again then. So I ran mostly a London setting, and bits of that always keep bubbling around in my head. I've always got sort of a city that's the one I keep doing stuff with. That one was a sort of standard Camarilla city. I was quite pleased with the nightclub I had that was called Silence, which I always thought was a cool name for a nightclub.
One of the difficulties that I had getting into Vampire the Masquerade, and really a lot of World of Darkness games and Chronicles of Darkness games and the related kinds of games, is that they present you with a lot of ideas. There's so many things going on. There's so many different clans and groups and player choices that when you're coming in as a player, it could be hard to choose, what do I focus on? And as a storyteller, it can be hard to choose, what do I focus on? There's so many different factions and groups and ideas and goals. And then you have to roll in the players and their priorities, and how do you get them to play off of each other, but then how do you get them to play off of the world? So the biggest challenge is learning how to focus it all in and bring it all together for the story you want to tell with the tools that the game provides you.
I was lucky in one sense with mine, because I was starting with the first ever book, that the vampire was a lot smaller. Back then, it makes it sound like really old. Back then, when I was playing the game, we did, a lot of things that a lot of my group were very much into horror gaming anyway, so it wasn't so much a thing of going, oh, this is going to be a bit scary. And because Vampire was one of the first ones that was saying this should be about story and role play over rules, and that's, again, luckily for me, that's where my group was erring towards anyway. So it was kind of, for us, it was jumping into the game that we'd been waiting quite some time to play. And of course, the advantage of it was a lot simpler. There were just 7 clans. We didn't know about the Sabbat, lupines, anything. So there was a lot less to worry about. And it was funny in recent times when I've explained Vampire to someone who is about to join a campaign, and I've suddenly thought, oh my god, there's so much now. There's, God knows how many more clans. There's lupines, there's mages, there's all kinds of things. I don't start someone new off with explaining everything about all of the entire world of darkness. Be there all night. But you're thinking, oh, I've got more clans to give them options for, and more politics about the Anarchs, Camarilla, and about things. It takes a lot longer. There's so much more stuff. There is such a wide world out there. So it is, I think it's harder for a GM to shrink it down to something bite-size and leave out some of the amazing cool stuff that is out there, because it's so tempting to go, oh, I'm going to make you, instead of, oh, let's start with something gentle, like you've turned up in this city and there's the Camarilla. There's just these guys, that's all you need to know. There's these guys called the Camarilla, and it's so hard to know, I'm going to save the Anarchs and the Sabbat and the other clans, the Independents and the Carter and all sort of people. You want to bring them all in, and I think that's probably the hardest thing not to do when you start off. If people don't know, you can't give them everything, because they'll just be going, what the hell are we going to do with all this? But you've got to peel away the onion gently, and it's hard to do, because it's, as I say, there is so much cool stuff that you want to do and you don't want to wait for, and you'll be and there's undoubtedly going to be one player where they'll give you a character and you'll go, oh god, I've set this up to be a Camarilla game, but you are so clearly going to be into the Anarchs or something about that, and I can't wait to bring those guys in, but I've got to introduce you, I've got to take my time with this. Definitely the hardest part. But I think most groups these days respond quickly to role playing and things, and it depends from where you come from. If you have a group of, say, D&D players that are used to more, loads of extra rules and the like, you're going to have groups who, some will respond very positively to that. It's like, oh, this is so much simpler. Oh, brilliant, I'm in. And other people will, quite reasonably go, oh, I need more rules for this. This isn't concrete enough for me. I need more stuff. So I think it really depends where your players and your GM have come from as a background as to what's your hardest part going to be, because there's so many cool games out there to play. You never know quite where people are going to come from.
In the 5th edition of Vampire, there has been a strong kind of a street level focus, and when I was thinking about what is the obvious kind of topic for an introductory chronicle book as this is, I thought that obvious is, like, we should go with the core theme. If this is a street level vampire game, we should do a street level chronicle, because there is also a place for unusual and strange and new ideas, but those come after we express the basic and obvious ideas. And that's what I thought, let's do the simple basic thing here, the thing that is at the foundation of 5th edition Vampire, and to me street level play is where it's at. And that's also where the title of the book comes from in a very straightforward way. We have like 2 words. One is crimson, implicated is vampire blood, and all of the horror and sacrifice that goes along with that, and then gutter, which stands for street level. I think in this thing. We were working on the concept together with Kevin Shooter, who is the producer for role-playing games at Renegade. and we were just really going through these basic, like what are the basic concepts of vampire, like hunting or hunger, and the idea was just to have a story, like a small mini stories based on each of these very basic concepts, so that if you run them in some order with players, they will get introduced to these ideas. And there's something really practical with a street level game, in the sense of if we have players who are not used to vampire, then in a street level game, if you start very close to the embrace, what you have is somebody has just become a vampire. They have just found enough other vampires that there's a coterie, and they're figuring things out, like how does anything work? How do you even hunt? Like how does that happen? And at the same time, the player who is playing this character is also getting to know vampire and to know how this role-playing game works. So in this case, the character journey is very convenient in terms of what the player is also experiencing. And I think there's something quite like you can have that vampire experience only once in your first vampire game, and I think there's something really special about just encountering those basics for the first time. I'm kind of living through other people's experiences here, because for me it was a long time ago, but that's really what we wanted to support.
When I looked at the tasks given me, I thought to myself, okay, I flashed myself back to like a couple of decades ago, back when I was first getting into these, and I thought to myself, what would be the defining story for somebody getting into these games that slowly introduces them to the major pillar points of Vampire the Masquerade? And then I broke that down further. Okay, what are the major pillar points of Vampire the Masquerade, the stuff that you can find in almost any story? The answers I came up with, there are many, but the basic ones are, feeding, the wrestling with humanity, the struggle within, and the struggle without, dealing with other factions and politics, but also dealing with each other as a coterie, and then also dealing with the world around you and the outside world. So I thought to myself, okay, I'll organize this so that we start off with the very basic needs. So when you start off in the first steps, the very first story is, you are a vampire. You are going to a place where there are lots of humans. You are hungry. What do? And then from there, we kind of step it up. At the end of it, hey, suddenly there's an attack by somebody that's just like you, but in a way worse way, and there's nothing human about them left, and you have to deal with the consequences. That brings us into the next part of it, which flows into like, okay, now this thing that you were witness to is your problem. What do you do with it? And with that, we slowly progress from there, from like, okay, here's how you deal with people. Here's how you maintain the masquerade. Here's how you interact with other factions. Then we introduce them and we bring them into other parts of the Crimson Gunner. There's entry points for the Church of Pain, but there's also entry points for the Camarilla and the Anarchs as well. And so this kind of step-by-step, adventure-by-adventure, slowly bringing a vertical slice of most of the gameplay into it is something that I would have wanted as a beginning player. That was something with a little more meat than like your standard like beginner's box set, where it usually comes with like one story that tries to cram everything in at once. And those are fun to play, but again, those can be a little bit overwhelming, where it's like, okay, now we got to get to this scene where I introduce Frenzy. Okay, now we got to get to this scene where we have to introduce fight 3 people. I hope you remember how to do combat really well. This was something that I would have wanted as a player, where it's just this slow, increasing, but comprehensive buildup, so that when you get to the end of first steps, when it's time for you to deal with the white in the way that you are, hopefully, as a storyteller, you're confident in how to run a situation like this and how to improvise from here. Hopefully, as a player, you are comfortable enough with your character, and you are comfortable enough with your players and your fellow players and your coterie, that you can handle just straight up, I'm putting you in this situation. You are in a white slayer. What do you do?
There are times when people play games and it's a bit more goth superheroes, and that's cool, that's fine. But I always want to remind people, no, you're vampires, you are having to kill, but let's not scan over hunting. I mean, you can't do a hunt every day, because afterwards we don't do anything else other than hunt. And I know that's vampire, but I'd like to do all the other stuff as well. So you can't do it all the time. But I think you need to remind players that this is what they're doing and this is what the characters are doing, that they're not always the guys. But I like that to sort of be a thing that continues to get, just as they think, oh yeah, we're getting into the adventure such as it is. Well, you need to hunt now, don't you? So for me, I think the thing I'd usually have as the thing that propels you into the adventure, first off, would probably be the Masquerade. Because again, a lot of people go, I have one player we introduced to the game, and it's like, but I'm a vampire, why can't I basically run riot and kill lots of people everywhere? And I go, well, there's a reason for that. It's called the Masquerade, and there's a reason for the Masquerade. So this adventure, you're going to be trying to cover things up, you're going to be trying to hide things so that you can learn how to do it, but also learn how important it is, and that gives you that structure.
We had a modular structure for the Crimson Gutter. The idea is that you don't encounter these elements organized in terms of purely the story, but instead they're organized like a toolbox. So you have locations are here, supporting characters are here, and that makes it easier for you to customize all of the material for your own purposes. For example, if you want to just use the raw materials but make something a little bit different with them, or you have an existing chronicle and you just need a bunch of supporting characters for that, you can just ransack the book and steal everything from there and use it as it is. And the modular structure was really important for us in making it useful in that sense, that it's less about like us telling a story with this chronicle book, and it's more about you, the storyteller, using these materials to create your stories at your table.
From the opening, you're giving a sandbox hunting scene. Sometimes for people, that's enough, or they could just be, oh, I fed on somebody, and depending on how the dice roll, that might not end very well for them. It could lead to all sorts of chaos. But there's also a couple of different places where you could think, oh, geez, wow, okay, I'm playing a vampire, really dang. There's a story where you are asked by a couple of higher-ranking folks in the city to basically cover up this white attack by a number of human investigators, and you're asked to come into these people's lives and essentially find ways to convince them by hook or by crook. And the point of that one is to encourage people to use not only their disciplines, but also their backgrounds. Oh, okay, I have this influence that I've developed. I can go into this office because of the secret dealings that I've been doing in the background while I've been growing my vampiric power. Or they could just go, yeah, so I have Dominate too. Let me in. There's also a story where you have to deal with somebody who enters frenzy. And I think that might be a big one, because that shows you not only frenzy from the perspective of the outside, but it also, hopefully, it makes somebody think for a moment, that could be me. And in fact, by the time you get there, it's entirely possible that was you a couple of sessions ago.
First, we start with simple vampire concepts, like I mentioned before, hunger and so on. But a crucial turning point is when the characters encounter the Camarilla and the Anarchs and the Church of Cain for the first time. And the Camarilla and the Anarchs are, of course, the two great sects. And the Church of Cain is a vampire faith that has adherents from both sects. So there's some complexity in the local domain and what kind of power structures there are. And that opens up the world. Like, to me, it's very comparable to that moment I think we know from video games, where you have gone through the tutorial and suddenly you have this whole map that you can explore. And this is in Crimson Gutter, the moment is when you encounter the sects and you realize that instead of just being vampires, there's such a thing as a vampire society. And that's when complexity ramps up, and also the possibility for the characters to really make their mark becomes more obvious.
This is always the hardest thing with writing. The first thing is to try and figure out how I'm going to fit it into the word count. There's so much you can do. This, when the brief is basically introduce people to the Camarilla and introduce people to the Anarchs. Then, of course, your first thought is how you do this, and it's one of the things I found interesting in 5th edition. One of the biggest gear changes for me with the shift of everything was the Camarilla not declaring everyone is part of them. This idea that it feels to me now it's like the Roman state. We're still going to claim we own everything, but to be a citizen of Rome is very different to being someone who lives in Rome. And to get that shift, because I know there's a lot of other GMs like me are going to go, hang on, this is a gear change. How do I deal with this? What has actually happened here? So that was my primary thing going into the Camarilla part, to try and get that balance of the sort of Roman citizen idea. And then the one I just enjoy, I could have written a whole chaps on this. I had to be really careful not to write too much in these sidebars, but I thought it'd be interesting to take a sidebar, the same sidebar in each of the two chapters, and do it from the point of view of the other one. So I have in the Camarilla one, we have the what's so great about the Camarilla, but also in the Camarilla section going, why are the Anarchs so awful? And of course you have the reverse of this in the Camarilla one. And it's always, one of the things I always find quite fun is trying to get into the mindset of someone completely following a certain propaganda and then trying to justify that. That whole mixture is one of the things I love about this book, is that whole mixture. You've got three different factions, and it's not about your characters must pick one of these and that's it. It is about how involved is each of your characters going to be with each of these organizations, because they're all there. They're all, you know, they don't go away just because you haven't picked that option.
Personally, I just find the Church of Cain quite cool. so that, I admit, paid a little part of it. But when we talked about the concept with Kevin, we had this thought that if there's only two sides, the Camarilla and the Anarchs, it's too simple. And vampire politics is just never supposed to be simple. So a third group, but not a sect, like something different. And that was a church, because then it can operate on a different logic. Like it's not against the other sects, but it also, and it operates according to its own rules. But in a more simple terms, there's something that when I think, like, why would a vampire join the Church of Cain? And I think of it like this, that you're embraced and you become a vampire. And that's a very confusing moment, I think, for anybody when that happens. And that's because of the Masquerade, there's no information out there. Like you can go to the movies and go, I don't know, is this true? Who knows? You have maybe met a few other vampires, but they are liars. They are bullshit artists, so how can you believe anything? And then you go, okay, but why am I a vampire? What is this? What does this mean? And the Church of Cain is a place, when you walk in the doors, there's somebody who sounds very convincing and speaks with like a low voice, and who says, this is why. This is the truth. This is the explanation for all of these things that happened to you. And I think that is very attractive. Like when somebody tells you the story of Cain and the first vampire, how do you know that? Like what is that? How do you know that's true? But of course, if you are in a church and there's people who are like praying, it's at least more plausible, not for factual reasons, but for social reasons.
The Church of Cain is an example of the major latest Vampire the Masquerade major setting edition, the blood cults. Blood cults have been on the rise. These are groups of vampires who do not necessarily unite themselves on the materialistic ideologies of the Camarilla or the Anarchs or even the Sabbat. Instead, they unite themselves on more idealistic ideas of faith. And what that faith can be is varied and full of all kinds of fascinating ways of looking at the world. And one of these ways is the Church of Cain, which takes this ideology that God has essentially chosen vampires to be vampires. They must embrace who they are in a way that controls who they are. And they do this by facing their fears, no matter what they are, and by trying to intentionally separate themselves from the kind, from humans, trying to also keep away from vampires who they think don't live up to their ideals. So the important thing here was to present the Church of Cain as not a traditional sect in the sense that people only belong to this one thing. Members of the Church of Cain belong to the Camarilla and the Anarchs, and this is a point of contention for both sects. The Camarilla believe, okay, well, we're cool with blood cults. We could possibly manipulate this to our advantage. And the Anarchs of the city are like, okay, this is sabotage. You see those ivory tower freaks just accepting this is happening? What else could this possibly be? And our own people are hanging out at this weird Catholic church after dark, worshiping some dark god. We gotta do something. Vampires can have more than one allegiance to something. And And that could even be true in your coterie itself. I write it so that you can follow the Church of Cain storyline either as people interested in the faith, or they could be people who are keeping tabs on it, keep an eye on it for their chosen sect, or it can be both. Maybe it starts as, hey, infiltrate this weird little blood cult hanging out at this church at night, and maybe one of your players, if you're a storyteller, one of your players, maybe sends you a message or something that's like, hey, actually, what if I joined them? The Church of Cain is to show one example of how blood cults serve as a greater form of division that can happen outside of the traditional power plays of the major established classic sects of Vampire the Masquerade.
In the design of V5, the Sabbath is the enemy, and they have a very clear purpose in terms of like what they represent. That when we think about this as a storyteller game of personal and political horror, then the horror comes from this question of like, am I the monster? Like, is it possible to be a vampire and a good person? And that's certainly very hard when you are literally feeding on the blood of the living. And what the Sabbath represents is just letting go of this question completely. But that also is why they are and like a monstrous enemy faction. They are like the Dark Mirror. But historically, when we just look at what kind of things have been published for Vampire over the years, it's like a practicality that there's some cool things in past like versions of the Sabbath, especially regarding, I think, kindred mythology and these stories of Cain. And the way I see the Church of Cain is not so much in these in-game terms of like this is like the secret Sabbath, but more of as a way for us as designers to use that cool mythological material and present it in a way that works in the 5th edition, which is not necessarily in the context of Sabbath, but it's still in the game because it has such powerful resonance.
The locations in this book and the way things are presented are not geographically tied to anywhere. The city doesn't have a name. I tried to avoid, whenever possible, actual descriptions of geographic locations. So while there are definitely some things that somebody internationally might read and go, well, it's a little bit different here, it shouldn't be too hard to take these and tweak them. If you don't have an office park available to you, true business district, I'm sure there's usually an area of commerce that you could just point to and go, okay, that's the location I can have it be. So obviously there are inherent biases that I, as a writer, cannot avoid. However, I do believe that a little bit of elbow grease, you could definitely set this pretty much in almost any urban area, really. And if you really want the challenge, you could even set it in like a rural area and just have a lot of these locations be spread out. Like, there's a theoretical Crimson Gutter that is immediately forming in my head now, where you take the locations and you set it in like a whole county or region if there's like a sparsely populated thing. So you have all these vampires in here, but no one's ever really worried about, the ever famous, oh, but the population numbers, how do all the blah, 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 blah. There's your solution for something like that.
That's the other thing with Vampire. It is so hard to do and create adventures for, because the GM has created their own city, and you don't want to just present them with Nosferatu A, who is a high-ranking elder. You want to give them some character, because that's where the real where it gets personal is when it matters to an NPC. You don't want to just say this Nosferatu is a bad guy. You want to say, well, why is this not? What's the thing that's really got this Nosferatu's goat and why they want to go after the characters? Why is that personal? So a good chronicle book is one that gives the GM a load of stuff that they can easily weave into their own campaign.
Crimson Gutter is the blueprints to a chronicle. It's not a full chronicle in the sense that it's every single plot beat put out, that there's this entire cast of characters. In fact, I wrote a lot of, not all of, the pre-made characters, the SPCs for this book. I intentionally wrote them so that they were not in official positions of power. You're not going to open this book and find it by night book. There's no princes or anything like that, except mentioned in a very vague term. These are higher ranking folks, they're potential sires, but they're not inherently in any positions of power. So the idea is that it is a blueprint, it is a toolbox. All the tools are there, but it is for you as a troop, as a group, to put them together to learn how to build a chronicle and how to run a chronicle, and as well as how to play Vampire the Masquerade and figure out what kind of play style you like and where to go from there. I had mentioned this earlier. Think of it as like an expanded beginner's box set. It's kind of a training program for the game. It introduces you to a lot of major concepts, and it invites you to fill in the blanks and gives you enough background to fill in those blanks so you don't feel lost, to create a city of your own, a chronicle of your own, and eventually your own story. This is the Crimson Gutter is a very, very detailed beginning for what is hopefully an incredibly rich and horrifying and super fun chronicle for players around.
One of the delights of being as a games designer is you see, I mean, particularly when you see people streaming, I'll see something come up and go, oh my God, someone's running my thing I wrote. And then you see them do something incredible with it. That's the awesome part, where you see people do it. I long to see someone play any one of the adventures that I've put together and then see them go, oh, they did that with it. Oh, I wish I'd thought of that. Oh, it is so cool to see people just enjoying the game and taking it further, because, you know, as writers, as books, we are just a starting point. You know, where that goes in your game is, you know, is the really cool part. That's where it really gets interesting, and that's what I always love seeing.
What I wish is that that you enjoy it. I hope that you enjoy this thing that I wrote. I hope that you are able to know where to go, that you're not like me when you're all the way back all those years ago, when you're faced with all this cool material and you think to yourself, wow, this is really cool. Vampires can do all this stuff. So what do I do with it? So I hope that you know what to do with it. And I hope that if you're an experienced storyteller like I am, and maybe you were never considering purchasing this book because you're like, well, I'm already running a chronicle, or I know how to use a chronicle. I've done this so many times in my sleep. You know, some people are like, I've been doing this since 1991. Well, what new can you tell me? What I would hope from that is that maybe they pick up this book and they think to themselves, oh, here's a character that I can put here, here, and here, or oh, this is a cool idea, or this is a cool location, or think about the rules in different ways. Like for the nightclubs and social gatherings locations, they have different resonance charts that are different from the ones that are in the core rulebook. The default one is if you decide to roll a check to see what resonance a human has. And I hope stuff like that maybe like remind people that ultimately this game is pretty malleable, that you can and should customize it to better fit the kind of story that you want to tell. I hope that new storytellers and players can have an easier time learning the game and creating stories of their own. And I hope veteran storytellers can find material that they can enhance their own games with, or maybe see how they run things in a brand new light.
There's like one specific thing that is beautiful about role-playing games and making them, which is that you can be surprised by something that you worked on. Like it can surprise you in the wild when it's published. And that's really like what is the hope for me, is that it gets used, it gets played, and that it would be useful to people. I especially hope that somebody uses in it a way that is a complete surprise to me, that when I hear about it, I go like, that I would think that I never expected anybody to do that. Because that's a wonderful thing about having things where we make a book, then a storyteller uses the book, then players play with the book, and everybody in that process is like a creative artist in their own right, and that's a wonderful part of this.